the way our sculpting process works, when we get after our sculpting team does a first pass of actually changing the turns you guys saw on Discord into a viable sculpt, what we do is we grow that sculpt in the model shop to hold it in our hands to confirm the proportions, the feel, the angle, the posture, the scaling. All of that happens still analog by holding a miniature in your hands. And so you start to make comments on that sculpt. Hey, can we shrink the head? Can we grow it another millimeter taller? It looks kind of short. This leg is in a weird position. All of that stuff continues to happen in the background with this other kind of set of 3D prints that we have to do as part of our process to prep those for tooling. Because the plan is on November 15th, when this funds, it triggers a milestone at Hasbro called the tool start, which means all of those files batch up, they are with the factory, we green light it, and they cut steel. And the plan on the calendar is that will happen on November 15th to ensure that everybody gets their copy before the end of next year. So in order to do that, we have to be doing the affirmations, the confirmations, the refinements to all of those sculpts while the campaign is happening. That's all happening on a daily basis. So if there was a question of whether or not, we all kind of pause and wait for the campaign, that's, out of scope for the way the team has to work. And that, that's our confidence in the project that, there's still, the team is still going in every single day, all day, and working as if this is going to happen on November 15th, and everything will be prepared for that. And that includes the way those sculpts are kind of refined for final production.
And for like the crowdfunding campaign itself, because you mentioned some things about it, what do you think is like, aside from what's already been mentioned, what's some of the most challenging parts of moving through this campaign, or even getting started with it, moving through it?
I think Patrick has mentioned it several times that the data of a Avalon Hill board game, we don't have a lot of it, right? And especially compared to how a Haslab campaign runs. They do run differently than a Kickstarter. The way the marketing support functions, the way the website functions, it's all very different than, a standard Kickstarter model. So the data is a little wonky compared to if you tried to just line it up perfectly with a Kickstarter. So it means like Patrick in particular is probably in this weird rabbit hole on a daily basis where he's trying to crunch those numbers and almost document the historical kind of a breakdown of how this is going, so that he has that data for the future and can kind of each day more confidently predict how this thing is going. But because it's ours, because it's within the confines of kind of Hasbro proper, it gives us potential tools we can leverage to ensure its success, right? And that's an ongoing process in terms of other ways we want to gain awareness and reach out and and get information into the hands of demographics that maybe haven't been yet exposed to the Haslab. All of that is within our ability to do because it's ours. Where that might be a little bit more troubling on a Kickstarter that has those kind of plateaus in the middle of their timelines. But we're still 30 days out. We're almost I think we're a little over a third now. So I mean. And there's still a lot of plans to keep getting the word out, to keep supporting it, to produce other things that are going to pique interest and produce opportunity. So we're just gonna keep at it.
For sure. And I know there was like some comments we had on Matthias Maccabees and OEAO Mike last week discussing some of their comments that they did in their own podcast, Casters of Valhalla, and like about the presentation of the Haslab site. Just describe, if you could describe a little bit of that process, what it's like to, because you're interacting with Hasbro, right, to try and present a good page as possible. Just describe some of that process to us, if you can.
Yeah, well, I'll say I mentioned earlier that Hasbro Pulse is not necessarily run by Avalon Hill. It's a different entity within the building with their own web designers, and you'll notice if you kind of flip in and out of multiple Kickstarters, multiple pre-orders, you'll notice that there's some grid templating happening there. There's some standard best practices that they employ. And that makes it hard for Avalon Hill because their bread and butter, they're by far their most popular stuff on that website is the action figure business. Action figure businesses that tend to have very heavily supported entertainment, huge brand awareness, and for the most part, you're merely celebrating what is a pretty intuitive play experience with an action figure. I mean, most collectors at this point know how a 6-inch action figure tends to function. So there isn't a lot of heavy lifting that has to go into Hasbro Pulse in terms of explaining the play features or explaining the experience. That makes it really hard on Avalon Hill because you need those other layers of how the game actually functions, and how that works. And kind of out of the gate, we knew we were focusing on existing Heroscape players. So when you kind of combine those two perfect storms together, you kind of produce what feels like a website that isn't explaining how the game is played, right? That became an easy and obvious thing to kind of for us to point at internally, as we were starting to watch the numbers and say, okay, that's some place we can improve. It's definitely something that we're getting consumer feedback on. It's definitely something we know is not something we have necessarily done as kind of Hasbro Pulse in the past. So how do we continue to refine that and make it a better experience? And stay tuned. Like I've mentioned a few times that there's a lot of things in the works. So I wouldn't expect that would stay the way it is very much longer.